Hi everyone, I trust that everyone is doing well, and if it is your first time to our channel, I welcome you. I kindly ask that you please subscribe to our channel and let's get informed. Let's get labor smart with Rich Auntie. So with a recap, the past week we made a series of retrenchments in terms of section 189 and section 189. So moving forward, today I'll be talking about dismissal due to misconduct. Okay, so just to touch base, I'm just going to speak very briefly about Schedule 8, the Code of Good Practice, and we're going to deal with dismissals due to misconduct. The Code of Good Practice is intentionally a general piece of legislation due to the fact that every case is quite different and law can be applied differently due to the circumstances surrounding the whole case. Okay, so in general, the Code of Good Practice actually emphasizes the concept of corrective and progressive discipline. So what this basically means is that the employer will then have a systematic approach when dealing with disciplinary hearings in the workplace. So for instance, if ever it happens that an employer will have to discipline an employee for a minor issue, then in a progressive approach, this will mean that the employer will either take this employee for counseling or issue a warning. So it's going to be systematic. All right, I just want to take it back a bit for all of us to understand, because I really don't want to make it all legal today. I just want to talk in general. So remember how in school we had a code of conduct, and if ever we breached that code of conduct, we'll either go to detention or a letter will be given to our parents. The same applies in the workplace. The workplace will have their own code of conduct, and if it happens that an employee actually breaches these code of conduct, these rules that are stipulated in their code of conduct rather, then the employer will have a recourse to actually discipline them according to the rules stipulated under that. Okay, so while we are talking about the approach of corrective and progressive approach when dealing with discipline in the workplace, we need to remember that it cannot always be the case where an employer will apply this approach when dealing with disciplinary action in the workplace, right? There are some instances that will actually justify a penalty of dismissal. All right, so remember that for any dismissal to be fair, we need to look at the substantive and the procedural fairness of the entire process. All right, so before anything can happen, the employer will have to have fair reasons why they have resorted to a dismissal. Okay, and if the reasons are fair enough, the procedure that they decide to implement is also as equally important, because that will also determine whether or not the dismissal was fair or unfair. All right, there are certain things and certain rules that the employer will have to follow to ensure that the procedure is followed correctly for it to be deemed as a fair dismissal. Okay, if ever I, Nguli, I'm employed at the company XYZ, right? So I'm an employee of XYZ and I come to work late every single day. In this regard, the employer, because now they actually want to deal with discipline in a progressive and a corrective manner, I think the first time they would just give me a verbal warning. Second time they'll give me maybe another verbal warning to say, hey, stop. But the third time they will give me a written warning, and if ever it continues, it might lead to a final warning, and if I still do not correct my ways and I still come to work late, that can lead to a dismissal. But that will be after I have received all these warnings. I've been to a disciplinary hearing and still, shame, I'm not changing. That will lead to a dismissal. But there are instances where it happens that the first offense actually it leads to termination of employment. So this particular offense is offense of such gravity that the continued relationship of employment between myself and XYZ becomes unbearable. All right, then it leads to the termination of my employment. And these kind of circumstances, I'm going to name a couple of them. This will definitely lead to the termination of employment, right? So if it happens that there is gross negligence and gross insubordination, if it happens that I, as Nguli, willfully puts the lives of others in danger, let it be my fellow colleagues, my employer, or even a customer, if I willfully damage the property of my employer, this will lead to a termination of my employment. And unfortunately, sometimes this does not even go with a warning or a disciplinary hearing. Okay, so let's talk about these things and let's educate ourselves so that we do not find ourselves like Nguli does in these situations. Okay, it can happen that an employer considers certain factors before they decide on the penalty of dismissal. Okay, so if it happens that Nguli here that works at XYZ has been employed for 25 years and I do not have any offense on my record, this may work to my advantage, whereby XYZ as my employer might consider a much lenient penalty instead of dismissing me. Okay, so they will have all these other things to look at, and if things work in your favor, they might reconsider terminating your employment and maybe giving you your final warning or first warning, but it will be a much lenient penalty instead of dismissing you. Okay, but if it happens that your record is not clean, maybe yes, you do have a long years of service, but your record, shame, you've been in and out of disciplinary hearings, it will not work in your favor. This will also ground for your dismissal, unfortunately. So it is also very, very important that the employer remains consistent in the way that they deal with these kind of situations in the workplace. When there is also an element of consistency, meaning that someone has done the same thing that I have done, and they got a warning. It cannot be that I did the same thing but I get dismissed. So the element of consistency plays a huge role in this regard, that the same people or people, when they do certain thing in the workplace and the first time they found it worthy of the penalty of dismissal, it should be applied consistently with other employees that might find themselves in this particular situation as well. Okay, so corrective and progressive approach and the element of consistency when dealing with disciplinary action in the workplace are quite important. So remember that the past 3 videos we spoke about the dismissal due to operational requirements, and in this process that the employee will then had to serve a notice so that they can start with the consultation process. Unfortunately, it's not the case in this regard. However, it's quite similar. So obviously then an employer will have to launch an investigation, and it does not necessarily mean that the investigation has to be a formal one. It can be quite informal. So then the employer will notify the employee of the allegations, and the employee will have the opportunity to also state their case. And after this has taken place, the employer will notify the employee on the decision that they have taken, and it is also preferable that they also do this in writing. So then the employee by then will know exactly where they stand and whether they are getting dismissed or not. Okay. If ever you do have a question or you are dealing with this and you do not know how to go about this, kindly just send us an email on the link below. Thank you so much for your time, and can't wait to see you again next time. Have a lovely day.